Our topic tonight is Iran. Iran has had a bad year, which is an understatement. It's had many setbacks. We are asking the question, does its current situation open a path for diplomacy? It's really the topic of the day, and I mean today, in fact. And you think of the setbacks, some of them, I mean, the Israeli and the American bombing of Iran's nuclear facilities in June. You think of Iran's other setbacks in Gaza, in Lebanon, and Syria, and in Iran itself. But the reason it's the topic du jour is that it's on the agenda at the United Nations today. Iranian President Pezeshkian today told the General Assembly that Iran has never sought nuclear weapons and never will. I think there's a certain credibility problem, but that's his assertion. Meanwhile, there's a deadline. It was invoked just several weeks ago by countries which had helped bring about the joint plan for action to curb Iran's nuclear ambitions. And the deadline expires Sunday. Either Iran restores full inspections by the IAEA of its nuclear facilities and accounts for all of the enriched uranium, or major sanctions will be reimposed. Negotiations, one can presume, the way the UN works at this time of year, are now underway. Our speaker tonight is a polymath in a way. He has Kamran Bokhari received his PhD degree from London's University of Westminster after writing a thesis about moderation among Salafists and jihadists. Not your typical thesis. He went on to co-author a book about political Islam in the age of democratization. He currently teaches at Georgetown and the University of Delaware, and he's affiliated with the University of Ottawa, Canada. He's also a founder of the New Lines Institute in Washington, a think tank that you may not know that much about, but it has turned out really terrific, provocative essays and articles. And he helped establish a graduate program there in strategy and policy. He is an expert on South Asia, Central Asia, the Middle East, terrorism, strategy, and geopolitics. Tonight we'll focus on Iran. It's complicated enough. Dr. Bokhari, the floor is yours.
I've been asked sort of to talk about the moment. And the current moment, I do agree, is opportune in the sense that Iran is at a point in its evolution where there is a considerable degree of the likelihood for rethink, if you will, on the part of the Iranian elite. And I'll get to that in a bit here. But I'd like to start off by looking at Iran historically, because it's important to understand not how we see Iran, but how the Iranians see themselves. In the field that I work in intelligence analysis, we call this empathetic analysis, where we try to put ourselves in the shoes of the actors that we are studying and see the imperatives through their eyes, see the pressures that they feel, and see the constraints that they are. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. See the constraints that they feel and that they're working with. So with that, let me begin here. Okay, so this is just sort of the run of the play for this evening. I want to go through the history. I want to come straight to the contemporary geopolitical situation, the broader strategic environment of Iran, and then look at the regime in terms of how it's been evolving. That's something that is largely missed in the open sources. There's a great deal of complexity And I'm sure you saw the email from the council, which sort of had linked some pieces that I've written. So I encourage you to look at that, especially the big long report that the New Lines Institute published last year on post-Khamenei Iran, when the supreme leader passes. What are we looking at? And then, of course, I want to talk about the strategic rise, over the last 3 to 4 decades of Iran. And then, of course, how very quickly that entire sort of edifice that the Iranians created in the region through its proxy network collapsed very quickly, I would say since last April. And then, of course, we want to talk about, okay, so what is it that the United States can do? I'm going to try to run through this very, very fast. There are a lot of slides here, so bear with me, because I really want to get to where you ask questions and I answer them, because I think that's far more valuable than me just sort of lecturing here. Okay, so let's start. Okay, so I want you to understand this is the largest Persian empire, the Achaemenid Empire. If you look at the dates, I'm not going to be reading through them. I just want you to understand the expanse, the geographic expanse of the Persian Empire in that era. This is, Zoroastrian Iran. This is not Islamic Iran. This is Iran with a very different Persian script. It is not the Arabic base script that we know of today. So this, if you look at it, it's like from India through most of Central Asia, through the Middle East, large parts of what we call, North Africa, parts of Sub-Saharan Africa, and then the entire Black Sea Basin, if you will. So I just wanted you to have that in your mind. Now, as we move forward, this is sort of the zenith of the historical Persian Empire. I want to also say something, because we're going to go through a lot of territorial maps. The maps are depicting the particular, empire at its peak. It's not always controlled all those territories. So unlike the modern era where borders are sacrosanct, and if you mess with them, then you're in trouble. Back then, today this entity controlled X territory, tomorrow somebody else had it. This was just sort of the nature of the human condition. Okay, so then came the Parthian Empire. Look how much it shrunk from the previous one. So you see that it's sort of like, okay, right around the Persian core, which makes up modern day Iran. I wish, some of these maps overlaid modern borders so that, it became a bit more apparent. But you can see, they're pushing into Iraq, parts of Turkey, parts of Syria, parts of what we now call Saudi Arabia. Okay, so this is then sort of the last Persian empire before the onset of Islam. It's the Sassanid Empire, and it's also pretty expansive. It's not as big as the Achaemenid Empire that I showed in the beginning, but it's still very expansive. It's literally the only place in the Middle East that it doesn't touch is the interior of the Arabian Peninsula, because for obvious reasons, it's harsh terrain, it's desert, and we're talking, the 3rd century onwards. So, we don't have the technology that came on much, much later. So this is the empire that sort of fell after the rise of Islam, led by the Arabs out of the Arabian Peninsula. Every other empire that we're going to go through now is a Muslim empire. So these are the Samanids. They came out of the Abbasid Empire, the Abbasid Caliphate that was sort of like the largest Muslim polity of its time. When it floundered because geography prevented the ability of a Baghdad-based regime to project power and control over an extended period of time, over an extended geography. So those who were imposed as governors eventually became de facto rulers unto themselves. Mail did not come every day. So there was no way to communicate. So ultimately, if you appointed a governor, that governor became their own monarch eventually. So the Samanids are, notice that they have half of modern day Iran, large parts of Central Asia, most of Afghanistan, and parts of Pakistan. So we're going through all sorts. I mean, these are dynasties that have either were Persianate or they controlled Persia. Did I do something? Oh, there we go. Okay, then came the Saffarids. The names don't matter, but what matters is the evolution. Notice that it's still in the Persian core. And this area, if you look at it, is the Persianate corridor, if you will, that extends to South Asia, through Afghanistan, into Central Asia. So again, this is a Persianate, if you will, entity. Here we have an interesting entity. This is an Arab polity that took over large parts of what we now call Iran and Iraq. This is the first Shia polity or empire to emerge. Not very large, did not last that long, but this is the first sort of, if you will, amalgamation of Shia Islam with Persian culture. That doesn't last long. By the way, most of these Muslim entities are Sunni until I tell you otherwise. So the Ghaznavids came, and again, large parts of Iran, large parts of South Asia, Central Asia, and they're also they dominate Persia. This is a Turkic empire, and they came from Central Asia, and they are. Notice their geography. They control pretty much all of modern day Iran, but also Central Asia, parts of the Persian Gulf on the Arabian Peninsula, but most importantly, Anatolia, which is modern day Turkey. Here again, we have, another empire that is centered in the Persian plateau, but instead of going east-west, it's going north. The Ilkhanid are Mongols. So this is the Ilkhans are those Mongols who adopted Islam after the conquest of Genghis Khan. And this is his progeny. And notice at one point, they have controlled completely all of modern-day Iran. They are also, they're not ethnically Arab, they're not ethnically Persian, and they're not technically ethnically Turkic. They're Mongolian. So this is a wrinkle in sort of the history of that region. Then, as time goes by, there's further fragmentation. Notice the various smaller principalities. So at some point, and this is natural, centralized rule is not possible, and you have fragmentation. Does anybody see a name that's familiar on that list of empires? Iran. There's another one. If you like yogurt, you might find it interesting. Chobani, the Chobanids. Okay. So the founder of Chobani is, I think, Turkish, but Chobani is the anglicized version of Shaybani, which was a tribe, Arab tribe, that became Persianized and then intermarried with Turkic tribes. So the Chobani yogurt, their ancestors come from there. Notice where they are. They are sort of like, Iran and Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Turkey. They're from there. Okay. Everybody knows Temur, the lame. He was not able to walk, but he had a massive empire. Another Turco-Mongolian ruler, and he occupied, Iran is sort of the heartland of his empire. Okay, so this is the turning point. The Safavids are, if you ask the Azerbaijanis, they will tell you they're Azeris, and they wouldn't be wrong. They're ethnically Azeri, but in that time period, we do not have something called Azerbaijan and Iran. Azerbaijan, the territory of Azerbaijan, is part of the empire that is based out of the Persian core. So the Safavids are Turco-Persianate. Its first emperor decides in 1501 that state religion will be Shia Islam. And this is sort of when Shia Islam really takes root, not just in Iran, but also extends into Iraq. Although in Iraq, Shia majority does not take place until the late 19th, early 20th century. So the Safavids are one of the three, what the famous American scholar of the Islamic world, the late Marshall Hodgson, called the gunpowder empires, the three. The Ottoman Empire, the Safavids, and the Mughals. Mughals were in South Asia. Mughal is the South Asian variant of Mongol. So you can see sort of the connectivity there. So this was the largest Persian. This is sort of setting the stage for modern day Iran. The Safavids succumb to, corruption and all the nice things that empires go through when they decline. And so the Qajars took over another dynasty, a martial sort of dynasty that grew out of the military of the Safavids. So they are the last monarchy in sort of the ones who oversaw the creation of modern Iran. Notice that the Qajars controlled large parts of the South Caucasus, most of it, even the North Caucasus, extending the border all the way to Chechnya. They had large parts of Dagestan. They also control what is today large parts of Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, and even Pakistan. And so you're seeing the formation of modern day Iran. The Qajars lose significant battles to the Russians. They lose the Caucasus. They lose Central Asia. And of course, against the Brits, they lose because the Brits are controlling Afghanistan and what is today Pakistan, but was British India in that era. So you're seeing this is the result of all of that. This is today, Iran today. So I just wanted you to understand how Iran sort of metamorphed through the centuries. Okay, still with me? All right, great, okay. I want you to understand the topography of Iran. Notice it is Iran of today is a mountain fortress, if you will. It is surrounded by mountains. You have the Alborz up along the Caspian and the northern rim extending from Turkey all the way to Turkmenistan. And you have alongside the western periphery, the Zagros, and then lesser mountains that extend from the border with Pakistan through Afghanistan and connecting to the Alborz. There are some deserts in between. Why is this important? This is important because it's a hard country. You need to invest a lot of money for modern development because the terrain is just so harsh. This is what the population density looks like. Now, obviously, this map is from about 12 years ago. And so these are estimates from 12 years ago. They were not accurate then. And so we're working with dated and questionable data, but better than no data. And so notice where most of the people are. Notice that where the two deserts are, there is practically no population. So it's important to understand where the people live. Okay. These are the demographics of today. Now notice Persians make up only about 55%. I'm not talking about people who speak Persian. So that is the broader Persianate culture, civilization, and we can extend that to Afghanistan, Pakistan, Tajikistan, parts of Uzbekistan. I'm talking about people who are ethnically Persian, and they're only 55%. So notice you have the second largest, group are the Azeris near the border with Azerbaijan in the northwest. They occupy 3 different provinces, Ardabil and the 2 east and west Azerbaijan provinces. They form about 24.5%. Again, the numbers are fuzzy, so don't hold me to it. But they are, we know pretty reasonably well, they are the largest minority in the country. So that's the northwest. In the southeast, you have another ethnic group called the Baloch, and they're pretty large. The difference between the Baloch and the Azeris are still Shia. The Baloch are Sunni. So they're a double minority, if you will. Then there are some Kurds along the border with Iraq. They are also a double minority because most of them are Sunni. The white boxes reflect Sunni as part of the legend. And then, you can go through, the other minorities. There are lots of them. There are Arabs in the southwest. There are also Shia, but they are ethnically Arab. So I just want you to understand the diversity that Iran represents. This is Iran in its broader strategic environment. I mean, it's a Persian polity, largely speaking, in a region that is either dominated, to the north are Turkic people, to the south and the west are Arabs, largely speaking. And of course, in the west, further west, northwest, are Turks again. So there's a great book called Strategic Loneliness or something on Iran. It's by one of my Canadian colleagues, Thomas Genoux. You may want to sort of look that up. He teaches Middle East politics at the University of Ottawa. Okay, so these are the sectarian numbers, and these numbers are far more accurate than any of the other numbers that I gave you. Notice that the high concentration of Shia in Iran, in Bahrain, in Iraq, and in Azerbaijan, and then it sort of peters out. So it was not until the 1970s, I would say, or 80s, that the Shia became the single largest communal group in Lebanon. They were not until then. So this is all sort of over time evolution. And then, of course, they're not all the same types of Shia. Zaydis are a very different Shia. The Houthis are not mainstream Shia. They are different types of Shia. They're the Zaydi Shia. And then in Syria, you have the Ismaili Shia as well, who are, again, not mainstream Shia. Okay, let's talk about the Islamic Republic. If this looks complex, it is. This is my attempt, and this is version 4.0, over 12, 15 years, to try to make sense of how the Iranian government works. If you notice, I had to come up with this, and I had some really good graphics designers who helped me with it, because God knows I would not know what to do with boxes and arrows. All I can tell you is the stuff that goes in them. Notice that there are 3 different, well, actually now there are 5 arrows. They all represent different things, because what we have, the Islamic Republic, started out in its hardwiring a very strange polity. The founders, or sort of the architects of the Islamic Republic, had a challenge. How do you graft medieval Shiite theocracy and a very, very sort of minority view of that onto a modern state? A state that has to have a legislature, it has to have a presidency, an executive branch, and it has to have a legislative branch, and of course, modern armed forces and bureaucracy and so on and so forth. So this complexity is hardwired. The key thing to know is that there are three types of actors in the Islamic Republic. You are either come from the clergy, you're a cleric. Not all clerics are part of the political system. Some of them like their seminaries and do not want to leave them. They're very happy there. But some of them are ambitious and they don't finish their seminary studies and get involved in ideological politics and find themselves as in Iran. So does everybody remember the recently deceased Iranian president Ibrahim Raisi, whose helicopter fell early 2024 on a trip back from Azerbaijan? Well, he's one of those guys. He never finished his seminary studies. He was more of an ideologue than an actual scholar who spent time and earned his degrees and was a bona fide cleric. He wasn't. But he rose to the presidency because he was a politician. So there's overlap, but you are either a cleric or you are a civilian politician because you happen to have carved your space because of ideological affinity, or you put your time in, or you come from a family that's distinguished. So the current national security chief of Iran, Mr. Ali Larijani, is a pragmatic conservative. His PhD is on the thought of Immanuel Kant in German, from Germany, yet he is the national security chief of this regime. His claim to fame is he is the eldest son of a very prominent Grand Ayatollah. His father was a very prominent cleric, and that's why he and his brothers were able to sort of emerge. They were not clerics themselves. I mean, he has a PhD in political philosophy. And so you can see that. The third category are officers. You come from the military. And even in that, you had to distinguish yourselves during the 8-year 1988 Iran-Iraq war. Lots of them got killed because it was a very brutal war. But if you survived and you were decorated, that became your sort of springboard for further advancement in the polity, not just in the ranks of the military, but also in the political economy. So you can look at this and stare at this on your own time. I gotta move on, but because this is too complicated. But I'm happy to answer questions if you want me to explain what this really means. Just another sort of chart that shows the complexity of the national security establishment. Just keep in mind, when you look at this, it's very complicated. It boils down to one thing. Iran has two militaries. One is the more prominent Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, the ideological force, also known by its acronym, the IRGC, and then the regular armed forces. The regular armed forces predate the Islamic Republic. Their origins go back to the Safavids, and then to the Qajars, and then to the Pahlavi dynasty, the Shah of Iran, who was overthrown in 79, and this regime came to power. They are a continuation of that. A lot of evolution has taken place, but the easy way to think about it is the IRGC is built on ideology, though there is a caveat there as well. They're not as ideological as the clerics are. And the regular armed forces are what you would sort of call, and again, precise words to explain these things, so I will use the word secular and professional with all the caveats. They're not Western secular, they're Iranian secular. Okay. Here is the sort of the chain of command. So how do you ask yourself, there are two armed forces, how do they get along? Especially when the IRGC has, well, it doesn't have the hand in the cookie jar, it is the cookie jar. So, they are the cookie jar. So constitutionally, the regular armed forces are forbidden from engaging in politics. The IRGC constitutionally is obligated to engage in politics for obvious reasons. So at some point, the current supreme leader, and I call it, this is his republic because he's been at the helm for 36 years. The founder, his predecessor, Ayatollah Khomeini, for most of you who remember the 1979 revolution, he only ruled for 10 years, and he died in 89. This man has been supreme leader since then, and he has built and fashioned the state, literally handpicking people, building institutions. They say, there's an American saying, you make stuff up as you go along. Well, that's what he did. The reason why you have so many institutions that are so complicated and cross-wired is because he made stuff up as exigencies required it to do so. Okay, so what he did is he came up with this. He said, you two militaries, we're going to have an armed forces general staff headquarters. There's going to be a chief of staff that will then oversee to whom the commander-in-chief of the regular armed forces and the commander-in-chief of the IRGC will report to, and they will technically report to the Minister of Defense, and then they'll all come to Papa, the supreme leader. So in theory, this is what it looks like. Does it work in practicality? Nah. And we'll get into that here in a bit. Notice that, each one of them, it has their subdivisions. And so this is also a complicated structure. There's nothing that is not complicated about this regime. A bit of numbers here in terms of, strength and size. If you take out the militia called the Basij, so if IRGC is an ideological force, think of the Basij as on steroids. They are not professional soldiers. The IRGC go through professional training and whatnot, and they're still ideological. These guys, this is a paramilitary force. Think of them as crowd control people. This is the people who go in and commit excesses when there are protests. So if you take them out, the 450,000, guess what? The IRGC is numerically smaller than the regular armed forces, but it has a disproportionate amount of access to resources, far more than the regular armed forces. Okay, each one of them has the tri-services that we are very familiar with if we were in the military. They have their Air Force, they have their naval force, and the ground forces. This is the intelligence community, or an approximation of the intelligence community. Notice how many intelligence agencies there are. We think that the Directorate of National Intelligence, the ODNI, that was created in 2004, oversees 17 intelligence agencies that are part of the American IC, intelligence community. Well, we're better organized, we have more transparency, but they're a mess too, and far bigger mess. And there's a lot of overlap. And if 9/11 happened because intelligence agencies were not talking to each other, imagine what's going on here. Okay, quickly, this is sort of a run through the political history, some high points. And I'll share this PowerPoint. You have it, so you can share it with everybody and they can look at it later on. But notice that the things to keep in mind is under Khamenei, the Islamic Republic has been struggling for regime preservation. It has never satisfied that imperative. Why? Because it was hardwired. You said there are going to be elections, there will be popularly elected leaders, And then there will be clerics who are overseeing them, some of them elected, some of them appointed, complicated. But what that did is it led to the rise of what can be called crudely the Islamic Republic's left, which is what we call the reformists. So the reformists, by the late 90s, by 1997, controlled all the municipalities, had a majority in parliament, and they'd won the presidential election as well. Now, these are not reformists in the Western sense. These are reformists within the context of the Islamic Republic. You can think of them as more pragmatic, more moderate, more willing, cosmopolitan, wanting to engage with the world and whatnot. But how does the supreme leader and the clergy maintain power if they're sharing power with these guys? So this continued until 2004. In 2004, there's an entity called the Guardian Council made up of 12 clerics, 6 theologians, and 6 jurists who have an enormous amount of power. They oversee all legislation. They have to rubber stamp every legislation that is approved by Parliament. But most importantly, they vet people for all public offices. So if they disqualify you, there's no hope. So what they did is systematically disqualified a large number for the 2004 parliamentary elections. Now, mind you, the reformists have a sitting majority in parliament. Even those who were sitting there got disqualified by the Guardian Council, a way to get conservatives into office. They were successful. Everybody remembers the infamous Iranian president Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. So he gets elected in 2005 on that sort of conservative wave, where it wasn't a wave as in a popular wave, but he was part of that whole swing back, the pendulum swinging in an engineered way towards the conservatives. So what happens if you eliminate your opponents? What happens? You have all your friends in power. What happens? You start to fight with your friends. So if everybody's a conservative, then it's only natural that they're not all going to get along on everything. So you have what I call an intra-conservative rift open up. And that has been sort of the undoing of this regime, is that you have now countless, you can't even sort of keep up with the number of factions that call themselves conservative. And they disagree on a lot of things. But this happened under Ahmadinejad. Ahmadinejad was a shrewd politician in that he used sort of that whole conservative wave to elevate himself. He is the only president who is not a cleric. He's a former mayor of Tehran and a governor of a small province. He has a PhD in civil engineering, but that's pretty much it. He brought in a wrinkle where he went against the supreme leader. He and his colleagues were seen as sort of these neoconservatives who were engaging in sort of blasphemous ideas. So Ahmadinejad at one point said things like, "We should be celebrating Cyrus the Great." Now that's anathema for the clergy. He said his own media advisor went on television to say, not every word uttered by the supreme leader is obligatory. So he's challenging the supreme leader and created a huge ruckus. It further exacerbated the fight amongst friends. Time, okay. All right, so that has led to the current internal turmoil. I want you to keep that in mind as we move forward. Okay, so Some of this I've already talked about quickly. If you have shut out civilian politics, normal electoral politics, then it's just the clergy and it's the military. And the military increasingly became powerful because the clergy relied on them. The military became powerful enough to where the IRGC had the upper hand, the clerics had they were more dependent on them. And that's where they brought in the regular armed forces to counterweight against the IRGC. So these are sort of the shenanigans that have been happening over time. I'm going to quickly run through because we're out of time. But bottom line is the republic has been decaying for a long time. That's sort of the bottom line here. Okay, while the republic has been faltering from within, it reached a maximum point because of sanctions. The reason why they did the nuclear deal with Obama is they could no longer feed the beast at home and continue to support all these proxies in the region at the same time. Something had to give. They needed sanctions respite. Unfortunately for them, President Trump in his first term nixed the nuclear deal. And they'd been maxed out. And in an effort to sort of envelop the Arab world, they sort of came face to face with the Israelis. There was no way you were going to dominate Lebanon through Hezbollah, Syria through the Assad regime, et cetera, and not have a run-in with the Israelis. At some point, this was what happened over the last year, in my opinion, was bound to happen. Actually, I predicted it in an article in 2017. So they were maxed out, and when you're maxed out, what happens naturally? You contract. And in their case, the contraction has been very fast, very rapid, because it was because of military force. Now what you have is that they've been pushed back. They're trying to hold on to Iraq, and they're trying to make sure the Houthis stand on their own feet in Yemen, but that's about it. And then, of course, they got hit at home, and the supreme leader is 86, and he will soon be gone. And the word is that the military, which is now dominated by the regular armed forces, is thinking of front-loading a succession. In other words, if you wait for the supreme leader to die, then you can't control that. What they're worried about is that could become the opportunity for mass protests. To preempt that, they want to bring in a more acceptable cleric who will, I'm told, say, well, you know what, women aren't covering up, so what? It's okay. And, let's do some deals with the West because we need the money. That is their game plan. Okay, it's an opportunity for the US. It's very slippery. We do not have good granular intelligence, not that I'm aware of, to navigate this new Iran. Largely, we're okay. We've sort of boxed them in, but we don't know what to do with them. We don't know what to do with this opportunity that has come after 40 some odd years. And a large part of it is, does this republic get to the other side of its transition in one piece? Because do we want to be negotiating with people who may or may not be in power tomorrow? So that's the policy implication. Last, I will leave you with a forecast. Something's got to give. This regime cannot continue the way it is. The best case scenario is that the regime becomes more pragmatic and says, okay, we want to normalize relations. Whatever you're hearing right now in the media from the leadership proves to be true. And not just true, that those people are not overthrown who are making these moves towards pragmatism. A worst case scenario is civil war. And this is being discussed by Iranians inside the country because that's how bad the fragmentation has been. In my opinion, what will happen is because there is no countervailing force that can overthrow this regime and replace it, I think this regime will continue to muddle through with some doses of pragmatism. And I'll stop right there. Thank you so much.
Let's say there is an opportunity for diplomacy and for a diplomatic outcome that will actually stabilize Iran as well as the region, and maybe even end the nuclear standoff that is still underway. How well prepared is the Trump administration for that contingency? I mean, a lot of people say that they are very undiplomatic. I mean, that it's all impulse from the president. Is there, does Steve Witkoff, is he prepared for a negotiation? Have they got experts around them? In fact, who is negotiating? And is there a deadline of something that, as it appears to be, for the restoration of the IAEA inspections?
So a great question. So the answer is not straightforward. On one hand, those instincts of the president and sort of the pragmatism of Witkoff and his people, the president's negotiators are told to do a deal. We need a deal. Now, they understand each deal is different. You're right, Roy. They're suffering from sort of poverty of thought because they don't have the kind of experts that that previous administrations have had. But what they're trying to do, and I'm trying to be fair to the administration, is that they're saying there is the deal making that requires very skillful negotiators, and hence Witkoff. And then there is an understanding of the other side that can be provided by people as needed. So that is, in theory, the way this administration is operating. The problem with that is that reality is very fast. You have to have the two types of people in the same room at all times. If you're in an active negotiation, if you're in an active, volatile, dynamic environment. So there is the sense that, yes, we need to do a deal. There isn't, the good news is the principles of this White House are not ideological. They're not ideologically opposed to a deal. Is that sufficient to make a deal, though? No. What it requires is a deep understanding of it, of Iran and what they want. And there is a struggle in Washington between different viewpoints on Iran. There are those who are saying, oh, we need to engage. And then there are those who are saying, this is a dangerous regime. If you engage, they will take advantage of you, like they took advantage of Obama. And in between, there are people like me who don't know what we're saying and to whom. We're trying to say something. So it's a messy situation. They do need experts. There's also the issue of trust. So this administration has a deep mistrust of technocracy. They see technocracy as a problem in general. It doesn't have to be Iran experts as the technocracy. It could be the technocracy running the IRS or, immigration, whatever. So there is that allergy that is sort of shaping that. In other words, there's more of the baby being thrown out with the bathwater. So that is a problem. And then there is this suspicion about the established experts, is that they they are trying to run their own foreign policy. We saw this with John Bolton. The president came out publicly, I mean, as he does. If it was up to John, we'd be at war with Iran today. So, he said that on record. So he is afraid that if he brings in these technocrats who he cannot control, and then there is this whole thing about loyalty, that are you serving at the pleasure of the president of the United States who's been elected by the public, or are you just there to push your own agenda? And this administration, far more than any other administration in the past, I would even include Trump 1.0 in it, is very sensitive about this. And so, yes, so a lot of it is political, a lot of it is partisan, but to answer your question, on one hand, the instinct of being non-ideological, wanting to cut deals, to me sounds good. But that doesn't get you to the finish line. You need the knowledge, the expertise that I'm not able to see.
First, thank you for an extraordinarily comprehensive historical briefing. Thank you so very much. I guess my question to you is, what does muddle through really mean? What does muddle through mean?
It means many things, and it's a great question. Muddle through means that we don't know what to do, but we're still in power. Muddle through also means is that we have time to, there are no, in other words, we're not facing a critical mass on the streets that is forcing our hand. Muddle through also means that you get some respite from the sanctions without too many compromises. Because ultimately, and this is not just the problem of the Iranian regime, this is the problem of Putin as well. And I call it the engineering of the deal. How do you come to an agreement that doesn't make you look like you've capitulated? The president of the United States cannot be seen as throwing the Ukrainians under the bus. He says a lot of things. I mean, I don't want to get into that, but he cannot live with that politically. Putin, he's at the tail end of his career. He came to power because he was seen as someone who would restore the glory of Mother Russia. On his watch, the Russian Federation lost Ukraine. He's in a very difficult war that's led to a lot of debts. The economy has suffered, people are suffering, and it's been going on for 3.5 years, and there's no victory in sight. You only have 20% of the country. That's not good. So how do you come across and say this is a win? Apply that to the Iranians. The Iranians, I have always believed that the Iranians wanted to sort of keep the nuclear capability on a slow track. So we're not in a rush to get nuclear weapons, but we're going to use them as leverage to get other things that are more important. So they also need to compromise, and now more than ever. So if another way of looking at what does muddle through mean is the infighting within the regime remains contained, that no one faction. So, one of the things that I'm watching for is the regular armed forces imposing military rule on the country, especially in the wake of the war with Israel. You have the top leadership of the IRGC, eliminated. The IRGC is discredited because this is their policy. They were already being blamed for spending too much money on things like Hezbollah and the Houthis and not leaving enough cash for domestic issues. And now you've seen the regular armed forces, they're now in charge. So the head of the top general, the joint chief, as you want to put it, is from the regular armed forces, perhaps for the first time ever. On the National Security Council, the regular armed forces have a visible majority. The defense minister is from the regular armed forces, a uniform-wearing general from the Air Force. There's a seat for the regular armed forces, there's a seat for the Joint Chief, and all the cabinet members are allies of the regular armed forces. The IRGC has one seat now. Or maybe, there are a few clerics who side with them, but they're in a minority. This is unthinkable. This is not sustainable. So can they get along? Can they muddle through and say, okay, we have two militaries, can we arrive at a power sharing agreement? The guards are divided into three camps. There are those who believe that they've had enough of ideology. They are very practical people. They look at Qatar and UAE and Saudi and they say, these guys are pumping oil and gas like there's no tomorrow. And why are we under sanctions? And they are the ones who are saying, well, if we extended our influence as far as the Eastern Mediterranean while remaining under sanctions, think what we could have accomplished if we didn't have sanctions. Again, goes back to my presentation. They think of themselves as a great power. And that hurts when you're not. So there's a lot of reckoning. And so can these militaries get along? Will this transition to a new supreme leader be smooth? That's what I mean by muddling through, is passing those sort of milestones unscathed. Not in great shape, but you're surviving.
Thank you very much.
I hope that answers your question.
This quick question, and believe me, I'm not a conspiracy nut, but given what you were talking about with the military, do you think that they gave information to the Israelis to take out the IRGC leadership?
So that's not conspiracy theory, because that's the rumor on the street in Iran. Okay, so how did they know the location of people? Who is responsible for this? So by the way, everybody knows about the Quds Force, right? So Soleimani, who was taken out by the United States, his successor is alive. He was not killed. And there's a rumor going on that he works for the Israelis. And so it's strange what you can come across in the open sources in the local press, is that all sorts of theories come out. So look, I don't know if that's true, but what I do know is the regular armed forces are not shedding a tear over what happened, because they have been the stepchild of the political system for decades. They're the ones who saved the Iranians from defeat, total defeat against Iraq in the 80s. And they didn't get the credit. Their people, they don't have the same resources, equipment, they were not able to compete. How often will it happen that your rival military force is going to be in a situation where you have the upper hand? This is historic, and they're not going to give this up. They want to consolidate power, and what they do have is at least one faction of the guards with them, the pragmatists, those who say we should be pumping oil and gas like our Arab neighbors.
The presentation, I wanted to ask you about the position of Iran in the Middle East as a whole. I feel like in recent memory, Iran has been sort of the big threat all the countries in the region have been scared of. And when you look at their fall recently and versus Israel's sort of rise, do you think there's any space for a realignment for countries in the Middle East like Saudi Arabia sort of hedging their bets and working with Iran, or for Iran to sort of get themselves out of isolation with regards to Israel and the rest of the Middle East?
Hi, thank you. Not having traveled to Iran, often what we are given, even in graduate school, is trying to understand the mindset, like new lines of this strategic empathy of the Iranian people. and often I'll murder this term, it's characterized as garb sedegi, this West toxification towards the West. And you just mentioned technocracy in terms of this hesitancy of relying on technology and a globalized world. Is within the reformists, is that still a prominent mindset that would drive perhaps policy decisions after a regime change?
Sure, thank you. But I wanted to ask, like, present as administration and other, they don't look bigger picture, like establishing stability from Iran to Lebanon. And second, like Iran is from Muslim countries, they produce more educated females, except Turkey maybe. That is true. That's all.
Okay, thank you.
Please bear with me until I adjust the mic. Much better. Good evening. Hello everyone. My name is Haseen Amini. I'm a sophomore student from Gausha College, and I'm a student undergrad in international relations, politics, and at the same time economics. Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure, Mr. Kamran, to have an expert like you. You're also a professor. So from a student, a question for a professor. I wanted to know, how do you assess the impact of current political tension between U.S. and Iran in terms of like how the third parties, such as Saudi Arabia, such as let's say Israel, like it plays role in shaping the policies in Tehran, at the same time in Washington, D.C. And my follow-up question also goes, as a young human rights activist, I would like to speak on behalf of the women in Iran. I'm myself Afghan Canadian. I think Afghan women shares a lot of sorrows, shares a lot of pain, shares a lot of sympathy with the same Iranian women. So we have seen massive protests of Iranian women on the streets. The protests keep happening, but who is going to hear them? Who is going to take action? Especially when now the tension between Iran and US is happening in GCPOA, which is about the Iranian and US joint comprehensive action plan. So are these points going to be action? Are these women's rights, vulnerable group population, such as children, street kids, child labor, are they going to be heard in these seminars, in these massive conference meetings or not? Because this nation really needs actions instead of just discussions on these topics. Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, so they're all related questions, and if I don't get to one of them, please remind me if I forgot one of them. Unfortunately, the answer to your question is when we do deals, we also have to compromise on certain things. So we did a deal with the Taliban. The intent of the deal was, we will leave. You need to work with the state that we've built, with the anti-Taliban factions, and come up with a power sharing agreement. We're not going to impose one. It's for you to do it. The price of that was how you deal with human rights, women's rights, is up to you. So we're not going to do that for you. I suspect we will have a similar outcome in Iran. If we have a deal, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to bargain on that. We're going to bargain on other things that are more important for us. And unfortunately, human rights, I mean, let's be honest. So, I mean, we can be critical of this president, but the Biden administration did not say that we're going to continue fighting for the rights of Afghan women, and therefore we will not withdraw from Afghanistan. They withdrew as well. These are things that are beyond the capabilities of the United States. And this is why I believe this whole democracy promotion and whatnot was good. It was well-intentioned, but executed very poorly. because we didn't understand what would work and what would not work. So, and the same goes for human rights and women's rights. So I wish I had better news to tell you on that front. You had asked a second question, which was related to the gentleman who asked the first question about the region. Look, the Turks are historic rivals of the Iranians. The Saudis are a weaker polity, militarily speaking, and in an age where the United States is saying, you come up with your own security architecture, we're done doing security and the heavy lifting for the world. We're saying the same thing to the Europeans, and we're saying the same thing to the Middle Eastern allies. So the Saudis are fearful of that. This is why the Saudis just did that surprise strategic mutual defense agreement with Pakistan. Saudi money, Pakistani troops, that's the formula for protecting against, for futures, because if Iran is rehabilitated in some shape or form, that means Iran will have access to resources. Iran will rebuild. And Iran will be able to project military power. The Turks and the Israelis are also worried about that. So this four-way circus, if you will, geopolitical circus, is not about to end. We're just going to go into a new chapter because these are hardwired realities. There are four major powers in the Middle East: the Turks, the Iranians, the Saudis, and the Israelis. Unfortunately, none of them get along very well. I mean, do you think that the Saudis like what they see in terms of Turkey being involved in Syria? It brings back memories of the Ottoman Empire. And so they can't do anything about it because Syria is on the border with Turkey, but they want to keep the Turks there, which is why they got the Pakistanis involved, and which is why today, or it was yesterday maybe, when the president met with the 7 or 8 heads of leaders of Arab Muslim states to come up with a task force for Gaza, the Saudis don't want the Turks leading that. They themselves cannot lead it, so they're bringing the Pakistanis in as a replacement for the IDF once the war ends. So I guess what I'm trying to say is buckle up, there's a lot more to come. So I hope I addressed all the questions. As far as the technocracy question, I think the reformists, what has happened is the reformists are thinking along those lines, but the more significant thing is that a great deal of the conservatives have also converted to that idea of pragmatism.
You mentioned to me that the administration had actually reached out, the Trump administration, to Pakistan to send a message to Iran. What is that about?
So the message, I guess it's not really a secret message because the president says that, on live television. So it's not really one of those messages, but it's nice to hear it from somebody else. So the message is, do a deal and it's going to be good for you. Make Iran great again, okay? Just get rid of you're not going to have nuclear weapons. Let's get over that. Hezbollah is gone. So forget that. Do a deal with us and you won't regret it because there's a lot of money coming in. This is the same thing that this administration is telling President Putin. You can either do this and then it's not looking bright. And the Chinese are having your lunch, dinner, and breakfast. So do a deal with us, you'll be fine. That's the message that was sent through the Pakistanis, thinking that they're neighbors. So I'm Trump, they won't listen to me, but if they heard it from a neighbor, then that's good. So it was on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Beijing at the end of August. And there was this huge meeting between the Pakistani delegation and the Iranian delegation. And a key point of discussion was the message from Trump. Look, we don't want conflict, so let's just do a deal. Let's just get over this. Because remember, the president needs a foreign policy win. His polls, even today, the reports are, they're slipping. And he can't turn the economy around on a dime, but if he can show that he made this progress, it could help him politically. Thank you.